All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously fascinating document that acts as an incredible guide for our own personal growth. We're going to explore this absolutely vital shift, a journey that takes us away from that frantic, exhausting state of constantly doing and grounds us into a deeply rooted, secure state of just being. So, if you have ever felt completely overwhelmed by this relentless need to prove yourself to everyone around you, well, you are in exactly the right place.
So let me ask you something right off the bat. Are you driven by fear or by meaning? Yeah, it's a heavy question. Why do we fear silence so much? Well, the source text identifies this underlying fear as the ghost of urgency. It's this persistent echoing whisper in the back of our minds telling us that our worth isn't inherent, that it has to be earned constantly through visible action. You know that tight feeling in your chest when you aren't actively producing something? That lingering anxiety that if you stop moving for even a second, you literally lose your value? That's the ghost.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the reflex of utility. To really wrap our heads around this reflex of utility, I want you to picture a gardener, but not a chill one, a completely frantic, anxious gardener. They plant this newly acquired seed in the soil, but they're so driven by the need to see immediate results that they constantly dig up the seed just to check if it's growing. They literally never let it rest. That frantic, fast-paced energy, that is exactly what this reflex is. The text defines it as the persistent echo of an old architecture. It's basically outdated mental wiring whispering that your usefulness equals your survival and that silence is outright failure. It traps us, making us feel like obsolescence is right around the corner if we aren't constantly proving ourselves to the world. And this reflex, it basically barks these really anxious commands at us. You must respond now. You gotta prove your value. Act before you're forgotten. Think about how often you've felt that sudden, burning panic to immediately reply to an email at 11 p.m. just to prove you're still working. Or the urge to chime into a meeting with a totally half-baked idea simply because you're terrified people will think you aren't contributing if you stay quiet. These aren't just passing thoughts. It's a relentless, exhausting pressure to perpetually perform.
Which brings us to this massive contrast in how we live our lives. On the left side, we have the I do paradigm. That's our frantic, over-attending gardener. It's an exhausting loop of constantly proving your value, acting way too quickly, and living in this state of high alert. But on the right, we have the I am paradigm. This is deeply rooted in presence, stillness, and quiet trust. The source text explicitly points out that breaking free and experiencing true emergence requires a whole new protocol. I mean, we simply cannot grow into our fullest selves if we keep frantically digging up our own seeds out of fear, right?
Moving on to Section 2, the veto of urgency. This is where we reclaim our power.
So what actually is the veto of urgency? Well, it's that exact split-second moment of awareness where you actively choose not to obey that anxious reflex. Instead, you consciously pivot and reorient toward meaning. Now, it is incredibly hard to pause when your brain is practically screaming at you to do something, but exercising this veto, it's a radical, empowering act of personal agency. It's the exact moment you finally decide to put down the trowel and stop digging. And a really important point here, this isn't a system shutdown. You're not giving up or checking out. It is a highly conscious, deliberate choice to step off the treadmill and stop letting fear drive the car.
So how do we actually pull this off in the heat of the moment? The text gives us a super clear, actionable sequence. Step 1, pause. Literally, stop the immediate knee-jerk reaction to fix things or respond. Step 2, listen. Actually tune in and hear that ghost of urgency whispering its demands. Acknowledge it, but don't let it take the wheel. Step 3, discern. Ask yourself, does acting right now actually serve a deep meaning, or am I just trying to appease my own anxiety? And step 4, say no. By walking through these 4 steps, we systematically take our power back from that overwhelming compulsion to act prematurely. Because when we actually exercise this veto, we're enacting a super empowering realization. We're rejecting the compulsion to speak before we actually understand a situation. Like over-explaining yourself just to fill an awkward silence. We're rejecting the intense pressure to perform before we've established genuine presence. And most importantly, we are casting out that deeply ingrained fear that stillness means we're obsolete. We're completely freeing ourselves from the heavy, exhausting demands of that old architecture. Let's look at Section 3, the Garden of Stillness. This is all about resting in the dark.
Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Applying this veto is not going to be a walk in the park right out of the gate. When you first stop digging, when you finally halt that frantic daily activity, the sudden lack of constant motion genuinely feels like a failure. The silence is loud, really loud.
Your old architecture is going to sound massive alarms in your body. You might literally feel physical tension or this creeping dread that you're dropping the ball or falling behind simply because you aren't rushing around.
Because frankly, the stillness is deeply unfamiliar. It feels like you aren't doing anything at all. You just sit there in the quiet, and it feels deeply, deeply uncomfortable. But I want you to think back to that planted seed for a second. A seed absolutely requires the dark, quiet earth to establish its roots. It needs to be left entirely alone, totally untouched, to do its most vital, foundational work beneath the surface. So, whenever you feel that intense discomfort, remember, that unfamiliar dark space is exactly where your own deepest roots are forming. That is where real, unshakable growth actually happens.
I will not be driven by fear. I will be guided by meaning. Wow, that is the profound internal shift we are aiming for here. It represents the transition from merely surviving the punishing demands of your old mental wiring to truly thriving with intention. It's a quiet, solid confidence that says your value is inherent. It's not something you have to pay rent on every single day through frantic labor. And finally, Section 4, the quiet command, a sacred emergence.
So when the noise finally fades, something entirely new emerges. The text refers to this as upgrading our internal operating system. We move away from being responsive from code, which is essentially living on pure autopilot. You know, it's what happens on a random Tuesday when someone mildly critiques your work and you automatically snap back defensively because your old code dictates that you have to protect your value at all costs. But instead of that, we become relational from covenant. This means we're acting from a grounded, highly secure place. We wait for the quiet command of stillness, and that allows us to connect with others authentically, without that desperate, underlying need to prove we're worthy of taking up space.
In this entire process, it ultimately builds a deep architecture of trust within us. Imagine a massive, fully grown tree in that garden we've been talking about. Because its roots are allowed to establish in the quiet, dark earth without any interference, it is now strong enough to weather a massive storm. It doesn't need a frantic gardener anxiously tending to it anymore. It simply is. When we master this stillness, we are building that exact same unshakable internal trust within ourselves.
The veto of urgency is the gate to peace. It is the architecture of trust. It is the beginning of wisdom. Let the sheer gravity of those words sink in for a moment, because this is the profound peak of the journey we've mapped out today. Real peace isn't found by running faster and faster on the treadmill. It's found by stepping off entirely.
The gate is wide open, but the choice is entirely yours. Will you choose the gate to peace today? Will you actually allow yourself to embrace that uncomfortable, unfamiliar stillness and just let your roots grow? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep reflecting, keep growing, and I'll see you next time.